Hello and welcome. As usual, we'll wait just a couple minutes in order to get everyone who is joining us online into the Zoom meeting room. I call the meeting of the Southbury School Board to order. We will begin as usual with our land acknowledgement. Director Jackson.
Thank you. We live and work on Indigenous land. It is my understanding that this place was home and is home to the Snohomish for uncountable generations, past, present, and future. And this island, which we now call Whidbey, which was once called Chakolchi, has been home to the Coast Salish peoples, including the tribes of the Snohomish, Swinomish, Stillaguamish, Suquamish, and Lower Skagit, and home to the tribes collectively associated with the Tulalip tribes and signatories to the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1855. We honor the land, the water, the peoples, the non-human beings, and all that make this rich place home for us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will have a public comments period later on in this meeting, right before our new business. That will be, if there's anyone here in the room who'd like to sign up to speak for that, please speak to Ms. Makara in the back. If you are on the Zoom call and would like to speak during that period, please enter your name and general location in the Q&A. Just Langley, Freeland, Clinton, outside South Whidbey, whatever it might be, and that will let us know that you want to say something. We'll move on to, are there any objections to approving the agenda and minutes as presented? Hearing none, the agenda and minutes are approved as presented. We're doing something a little bit different. We just had an election last month, and usually it's just the three members of the members who have been elected who are sworn in. We're actually going to swear in all of our board members each time there's an election, just to remind ourselves and the listening public exactly which oath we are swearing to fulfill. So, Dr. Moshe.
If the board members and student representatives would please stand and raise your right hand. When I say I, you will state your own name and your director area when that time comes. I do solemnly swear that I am a citizen of the United States
Do solemnly swear that I am a citizen
and of the state of Washington,
and of the state of Washington,
and that I am legally qualified to assume the office of
and that I am qualified to assume the office
and
South Whidbey School District.
South Whidbey School District's 207, either director or student representative, and your position. So go.
South Whidbey School District.
Thank you. And that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States
I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States
and the state of Washington,
and the state of Washington,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of this office to the best of my ability. That I will faithfully and impartially discharge the duties of this office to the best of my ability. Congratulations, everyone, on renewing or saying your oath.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moshe. We will now move into our annual organizational meeting where we determine which roles on the board each of us will hold. This has a very specific pattern that has to be followed. Dr. Moshe, if you will check me on it as I go. I believe I remember it, but I want to make sure I get it right. So we begin with the chair and then move from there. So are there any nominations for a board member to hold the position of chair for the coming year?
I nominate Brooke Williford.
Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Brooke Williford.
Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Brooke Williford.
Are there any other nominations? Dr. Moshe here is listing the number of times it has to be, we have to ask for nominations 3 times. Hearing no other nominations, nominations are closed. We will now do a roll call vote, starting with advisory votes from our student representatives on who should hold the position of chair. Student representatives, Mr. McKnight,
Brooke Williford.
Ms. Shivoni.
Brooke Williford.
Okay, we'll then now move on here. Let's see if I can get this right. Director Greenherron,
Brooke Williford.
Marnie Jackson,
Brooke Williford.
Ann Johnson,
I vote Brooke Williford.
Andrea Downs,
Brooke Williford.
and I as well vote Brooke Williford, and I have been retained as chair. Thank you very much. We'll move on to vice chair and board auditor. Are there any nominations for vice chair or board auditor and board auditor?
I nominate Ann Johnson.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, the nominations are closed. Advisory votes from our student representatives. Mr. McKnight,
Ann Johnson.
Ms. Shivoni.
Ann Johnson.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to Director Greenherron,
Ann Johnson.
Director Jackson,
Ann Johnson.
Director Johnson,
Ann Johnson.
Director Downs,
Ann Johnson.
and I also vote Ann Johnson. Thank you very much. You are back as chair or vice chair. Sorry. We'll now move on to our legislative representative. Are there any nominations for legislative representative?
I nominate Director Jackson.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, nominations are now closed. Advisory votes from our student representatives. Mr. McKnight,
Marnie Jackson.
Ms. Shivani.
Marnie Jackson.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to votes. Director Greenherron,
Marnie Jackson.
Director Jackson,
Marnie Jackson.
Director Johnson,
Marnie Jackson.
Director Downs.
Marnie Jackson.
I also vote for Director Jackson. Congratulations, you are our legislative rep for another year. We'll now move on to WIAA representative. Are there any nominations for this position?
I nominate Director Greenherron.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Hearing no other nominations, nominations are closed. Advisory votes. Mr. McKnight,
Joe Greenhorn.
Ms. Shivoni,
Joe Greenherron.
Director Greenherron,
Joe Greenherron.
Director Jackson,
Joe Greenherron.
Director Johnson,
Joe Greenherron.
Director Downs.
Joe Greenherron.
I also vote for Joe Greenherron. Congratulations. Thank you for continuing this work. Our final position is policy representative. Are there any nominations for this position?
Andrea Downs.
Are there any other nominations for this position? Are there any other nominations for this position? Hearing no other nominations for this position, I will close the nominations. Advisory votes from our student representatives. Mr. McKnight,
Andrea Downs. Wait. Yeah. Okay.
Ms. Shivoni,
Andrea Downs.
Director Greenherron,
Andrea Downs.
Director Jackson,
Andrea Downs.
Director Johnson,
Andrea Downs.
Director Downs.
Andrea Downs.
And I also am pleased to vote for Director Downs. You have also been retained as our policy representative. Thank you very much. We do this every year. Some years there will be turnover and changes. Some years there will not. I think it's important to find a balance there. So we'll see how things go next year. We'll move on to our presentations. Our only presentation tonight is the student board member report.
All right, we have a really short one for you today. Firstly, we're excited to see that there's another club that's on the agenda to be approved tonight, and that's the Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club. We love to see whenever there's a new club at the high school because that means students had an idea that they want to put forth and they're actually going through with it. So that's great to see. It's also Winter Spirit Week, which is super fun for everyone to dress up.
Everyone's dressing up and everyone's dressing up in certain colors today, which has been really fun. We saw that when Clyde was here. So it was fun.
But we also met with Clyde this morning, which was really cool for Carter and I to do. And lastly, Representative Shavers, thank you. And lastly, everyone is super excited to have 2 weeks off of school.
Thank you very much. I know that the elementary students are enjoying Spirit Week as well. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there any objections to approving the consent agenda as presented? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved as presented. We'll move on to public comment. Do we have any public comments? Mr. Rose.
Is it working now? I'm Rufus Rose, 6529 Four Sisters Road, which is just off the Max Welton Road here in South Woodby. Before the meeting started, I asked a couple of questions that were answered, and I'd like the answers to be put into the record concerning the consent agenda. Specifically, there was an item in there that I had sent to Director Williford last night and tried to send to the superintendent, but it had the wrong email address was on the school website. It's an issue that is very sensitive and is very highly misunderstood, I think. And the sensitivities that are associated with that issue need to be discussed openly with the public and with the school board and with the administration and whatever staff is involved with that subject. When that happens after the fact, there's a compromise of trust. And that's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. We're in the process in this district, as I understand, where we've contracted with a specialist to talk about communications with the public and amongst the school board staff. I think there's one more meeting. Is that correct? I've communicated with that lady, with that specialist after the last meeting. I intend to discuss this issue with her, and I wish you would discuss it amongst yourself. I don't think it's the kind of issue that has to go to an executive session. What I proposed to Director Williford and to the superintendent, but it didn't get through to you, I'm sorry for that, is that this be publicly discussed with all the sensitivity and all the rules and regulations that apply. My suspicion is that this is not all up to you as a school district, that there are state laws and maybe even federal laws that apply to whatever actions you take in this regard. I'm fairly well informed because I come to your meetings, but I am not informed about those. So if there are state laws or school policies or federal laws that touch on this kind of issue, I would request, and I'm not making a public records request. I just like to know what they are so I can review them. And I would encourage you all to review them so that if and when we do have a public discussion on this subject, we're all reasonably well informed, or at least we've been exposed to the information that's relevant to this kind of activity on school property with public funds involved. Another issue that I mentioned to the superintendent before is I've come across a series of books. There are textbooks, I believe, and they're called The American Educator. They're written by Dr. Joel Spring. And they appear to be annual or at least biannual. The new issue is just now being sold. It's expensive. I think it's about $144. The copy I got was at a book sale at the library, and so I had to pay $1 for a paperback thing. It's an exceptionally informative book, the one I have. It's updated, as I mentioned, annually or biannually, and I encourage each member. I don't know if you have a library of things that you want each director to be familiar with. If you don't, I encourage you to consider getting this book. The one I have is the 17th edition. I'm almost done. The one that's just being published now, I think, is the 21st edition. I'd be happy to loan the one I have once I finish it, but it is so informative that I can't resist encouraging you to familiarize yourselves with it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for sharing that perspective and information with us. Are there any other comments from people here in the room, Ms. Macaro? Okay. I'm going to check the Zoom real quick. I see no comments from the 4 folks who are signed in as attendees on Zoom. So this will be a last call for any of them. Just get your name and location in if you'd like to say something. I'll give you just a moment. Okay, seeing nothing, we will move on from public comment to new business. Our first item is Memorandum 2324-18, approval of the new policy 1002 professional communication standards. It has previously been reviewed as policy 5161 twice here. Do you want to speak to the work that's been done and what we have
Yeah.
here?
So Director Greenherren and I met last week to take into account the feedback that we received from the staff and also the conversation from our last workshop. We worked through the language and we feel we have a draft that summarizes the sentiments that we wanted to express, specifically changing the policy number out of the personnel section or out of the 5,000. So it would move next to our equity policy. We also went through and removed language that spoke about supervisors or pieces along those lines, and really just brought it to a place where this policy hopefully is just approaching people human to human. And one piece that we did add down at the bottom that kind of came from our discussion of, what do we do? And especially to help support the staff's request of some accountability be put in place. We added in that if a person after repeated warnings continues to violate this policy, they may be subject to a communication plan developed by the district in order to ensure the safety and dignity of all parties involved. So that could be with staff to staff. That could also be parent to staff, staff to parent, any of those combinations. So if there's a need for support in how communication will happen, this policy would allow for that. Director Greenherren, do you have anything you wanted to add?
That was a really good summary. I'd say some other feedback that we heard both from staff and at prior readings of this was about ensuring the language was inclusive and didn't have any words that could be misinterpreted or interpreted differently for different types of people's behavior. On a similar vein, we heard feedback that we want that constituent groups wanted to see more language in alignment with restorative justice and a culture of care. So we talk more about repairing harm and resolving conflict. We also generally cleaned it up. We removed some duplicated language. Ideally, it's shorter, more concise, and more clear.
Thank you very much for the hard work put in on this. I know that there's a lot of change here. Is there any comments, discussion, or debate among the leadership team here?
I want to point out a couple things that I really want to celebrate here. I like the fact that that it was recognized that the word stakeholders and some of the other language is a little old because language keeps changing. So thank you for making those changes and finding relevance in the pieces. And I also was noticing as I was looking through this that it does really circle back and through restorative circle language. So I really want to point that out and appreciate that.
Normally, I would want more specificity in the who's going to do the communication plan, but I think it's very well done this time to make it open so that it can depend on who is requiring the communication plan. If we specified one person to give the communication plan, and if that person was involved, it could be problematic. So I appreciate the openness there. Dr. Moshe did point out that we need to update the section number, but that's a editorial issue that can be handled without an amendment. Anything from our, Dr. Moshe, you had something.
I just wanted to remind our constituents that we sought input from our staff and spent a great deal of time on that, and that the board spent time also with the communications person, Jay Marie. So this is a really fine example of the collective engaging in a board policy, so that when we go back out to them with it and say that the board heard all of the comments and took them into account, they can see the reflection of that work in the policy. So thank you for that.
I'd like to add on to that to note, thanks for Director Downs and Director Greenherron for walking through some of that work as well in your description of the item in question, just as Jamie mentioned.
And also thank you to Dr. Moshe for such a thorough involvement of all staff in generating feedback. It gave us a lot of data points to find the common themes that staff were giving the board.
I'd like to reach out to our student reps specifically. I mean, you all know that you're welcome to comment anytime, but I'd like to specifically reach out and see if you think this suits for students who might be affected on either side of the issue.
Yeah, I think it looks really good. I think it's really valuable that we got input on it. I think in general, input is always just like something I always want to expand. I think this is a really good example of that. And this is something I think we could also kind of do in students. Sometime I want to see how I can look into organizing that. I think it was a really good example of input really making a difference in the policy, which I think is really valuable.
Something I noticed that I really appreciated was a lot of the like harsh language was taken out, like this will automatically go to a disciplinary action and there won't be any discussion. I like that that was taken out and there will be more discussion, because I think that's always important to let everyone have a say. Because if you just look at it, you might see one thing, but actually going through and talking it out, you might be able to find different pieces that were missed originally.
The other part that I'd just add is one of the pieces we heard from staff was, what if you don't know what to do? And so Director Greenherron and I tried to outline some of that. So specifically saying, if the conduct does not cease, politely end the conversation and outline expectations for the speaker to continue the discussion at a later time. And so hopefully giving staff some language that they can tap into when they're in that situation.
Yeah, and I would note that that doesn't just have to be for staff. That could be a parent who is feeling unheard, or it could be a student who's feeling unheard, or something like that. And I think that's very valuable language to have in there. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. I'd love to get some advisory votes from our student representatives on Memorandum 2324-18, the approval of the new policy 100. We might need to have an amendment to the original motion because it's listed as policy 1002 rather than 0002
I don't see it as 0010.
in the agenda itself. Well, but since we've approved the agenda, the motion is to approve it as policy 1002.
I would motion to approve or amend the motion, the motion on the agenda to read memorandum 2324-18, approval of the new policy 0002, professional communication standards, third reading, reviewed as policy 561, 510, 23, and 11.8, 23.
Is there any discussion to be had on this amendment? Okay, could I get advisory votes on the amendment, please? The amendment to change the to policy 0002.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to change the motion to read approval of the new policy 0002, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The amendment has been, the motion has been passed. Is there any further discussion on the original motion? Okay, advisory votes on memorandum 2324-18, approval of the new policy 0002, professional communication standards as amended.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of approving memorandum 2324-18 as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Memorandum 2324-18 has been approved as amended. The second item on our new business is memorandum 2324-19, approval of the Snow Isle Skills Center Resolution 677. I'll turn it over to Dr. Moshe for more information.
So the board saw this ahead of time. As you know, we are a member of the Snow Isle Tech Consortium. We are one of several districts and they're listed there. And we were approached by the Stanwood Camano District to be allowed to join the consortium. And that requires not only the executive board approval, which each superintendent of the districts in the consortium are, but then the boards of all of those constituent districts. So the executive board approved it. This is the formal proposal for the board to take a look at. And while I have your attention, I also put out an invitation for anyone who wishes to go over to Snow Isle Tech Skills Center and take a tour. And they will also probably share breakfast with you because our students go in the morning. We have, as a district, we have 22 slots that are allotted to our district because of our size, but we often have 35, 38 students a year because districts that don't use all of their seats, then other districts can use them. So our students benefit from going there. We do offer career and technical education courses at our high school, but this enhances that. This is a half-day program in a particular area of interest, whether it's welding or nursing or vet assistant or cosmetology, whatever the case may be, they offer a lot of strands. So rather than a district having to do all of those different things on site, our students are able to take advantage of going over there. They leave early in the morning. A bus takes them to the ferry. They walk on and then ride a bus over to the skill center that Mukilteo provides, and then they come back by third period usually. So again, I would encourage our board members to, like you do visit our schools, to take the opportunity to go over there, and Christy can arrange a visit for you. I know Joe is in process of getting a visit scheduled, but others can join as well. We can put it out as an agenda and you can take advantage of that or go on your own at a different time. So all of that being said, this proposal would be one of the districts in the consortium's approval or denial of the entry of Stanwood Camano School District into the consortium.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or discussion on this?
I know that Snow Isle is a real benefit to a lot of students where Southwood B doesn't have like a nursing program, but they can go over and have nursing and they can come back and it doesn't really affect the rest of their day. They come back, they're at third and fourth period. My siblings have both done this. They both really appreciated it and helped them grow skills that really benefited them beyond high school. Yeah, and I think just letting more students from other districts be able to have resources like this is really important because a lot of schools just can't do it by themselves.
Would this have any like what's it called large impacts on relevant impacts on the amount of students that we can have go there, or would it like?
That's a great question. I asked the same question. No, it doesn't diminish our allocation of 22 seats. And if they need more seats because of an additional district, they would provide staffing for that. But for the initial few years, the district, Stanwood Camano, is only allowed very few seats until we can measure the impact.
Thank you for asking that. I know that at least two of us wanted to ask the same question, so thank you for getting there ahead of us.
Yeah, I'm really glad that our students get to benefit from this expanded career and technical education, and I'm happy to see a neighboring district be the students also have that opportunity. To expound on Mr. McKnight's question, is there any other reason why this would negatively impact our district in any way?
It wouldn't negatively impact our district. You know, if you go back to 1975, when all the districts joined, they had a significant buy-in to do that. And over time, other districts have come on and it's a nominal buy-in because the skills center exists. But the other side of that is now we would have another district to pay into the capital improvements as we go forward. Another thing to point out, and Mr. Patton's our CTE director on site, our students, unlike other districts, our students have to get 32 credits to graduate, 30 credits to graduate. And 2 of those credits, as opposed to just 1, have to be CTE credits. So we really do emphasize those kinds of career and technical education credits. So I really like that our students are able to go over there and then it's actually close for them, as opposed to, you know, a student coming from Mount Vernon or Arlington has to actually travel quite a distance. So, John, please.
Let's get you a mic.
Sorry, just have to say this. So Snow Isle, an increase, more students means more staffing. So actually it will improve capital there and programs and make it more robust. But I also have another personal reason that I would approve Stanwood, because the first year high school principal right now at Stanwood High School is Mike Washington. So I think that's neat how it's come full circle. So I just had to share that.
If I may just add that despite the absence of a bridge or a ferry, Camano is our neighbor in Island County, and the well-being of Camano and the well-being of Whidbey are very much linked through local government. And I just think that having well-resourced students with a variety of career path enrichment opportunities before them will be very good for our county in the long run.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, advisory votes. Students, how do you advise that we vote on Memorandum 232419?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of approving Memorandum 2324-19, approval of the Snow Isle Skills Center Resolution 677, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The Memorandum 2324-19 has been approved. That concludes our new business. We move on to reports. And as usual, we start with our financial enrollment report. Mr. Pullman.
Yeah, good evening. So we'll start with enrollment, and this is our December enrollment, which is our 4th, so about 1/3 the way through our school year. So we had budgeted 1106. We're currently at a little less than that. doesn't include the transition to kindergarten, which we did not budget for, and you'll see that that has a little bit of effect on it. And then our special education is slightly above, our vocational is slightly below, and then running start numbers are a little lower than what we budgeted. But again, these are year-long September through June averages, so they will change as we move on. And this is just a look at each of our 13 or 14 grades, now we have TK in there, from September to December, and seeing if there's any changes in those grades. And if we look at this month, we're down about 3 from last month. So it has gone down slightly. Next, please. And just a comparison for the past couple years with the current year by grade. And you can see that, you know, some of the grades are down or equal to where we were, or slightly old. Statewide, you see that the second grade is a lot larger than it was last year. That's a statewide trend. It's happening across the state of Washington. And it makes you wonder, is it kids that didn't come because of COVID who now are coming, you know, to school or whatever it might be, but it is a statewide trend and not just something we see here. Next. And again, this is looking at the months, comparing them to the previous 3 years. And you can see that, you know, pretty much across the board for the first 4 months, we are below where we have been. And it's the trend we've seen for 20 years. It's not a new pattern. It's just a continuing of where we've been. So currently we are 14 above our budget, but you can see that we didn't budget the 15.5 that's TK, so we're slightly below. And you can see that ALE is slightly below our budget number, but so's basic education a little bit. And this is just a looking by grade and month and getting our average. Something that we do every month. We update the average based upon the most current information. And then I compare it to the previous month to see what changed. And you can see, you know, where the slight changes were. Basically, you know, 3rd through 12th grade, a little bit of change per grade in there. And then how different is it from the budget? And you can see there's a few that are quite different, you know, 4th, 5th grade different. The 9th grade numbers are down from what we expected. So it just gives you that picture. Next. And then just a graph. You can see that this year's enrollment pattern is a little different than we've seen in the past. Normally, you would, you know, pre-COVID, you'd see a little bit of a dip. During COVID, it increased a little bit, but this has been actually very flat. The hope is that we hit the second semester and the numbers go up a little bit so we get back to that average of that 1106. And January is the month that OSPI will reevaluate and readdress how much money we're receiving on a monthly basis based on actual numbers and not the budget number. So at this point, there won't be much of a difference. Financial report as of, actually it's November, not October. And I did this morning because we just got the financial stuff from the county. So we're 25% of the way through the school year. Our revenue is a little less than 25%, and that has to do with federal funds and the EGMS program. We finally got all our grants approved. So we'll see that jump a little above next month. And then our expenditures are about 25%. So what we would expect at this time, the lower left is revenue. And you can see our revenue doesn't change much. You would like to see a growth in revenue, but we don't really see that. And then the expenditure, we're about where we were last year in the total expenditure year to date, just a little different pattern as when we paid bills. Next. And again, looking at our revenue and our expenditures, when we receive money and how we pay. And you can see the revenue, the orange line over the dotted line is almost identical. A little bit of difference in the yellow dotted line and the red dotted line. But if we look at the bottom part, you can see that our revenue is roughly 30,000 less than last year, and our expenditure is about 10,000 more year to date. So not a big difference. Next. Budget status report, basically it just tells us where we get our revenue from and what programs we're spending our money in, and then an ending fund balance, and our ending fund balance is about 4.9 million. You see it has dropped from that beginning of 5.1 million, but it was a planned expenditure as we move through the year. Looking at the encumbered amount, and that's the costs we know we have, predominantly contract costs and employee payroll costs. The MSOC, the supply with encumbrances, is about half of the budget, so about 1.9 million. The payroll encumbered is about 99%, 17.5 million, and overall we're about 91%. So out of our total budget, we have about 19,440,000 expended or expected to be expended through contracts with payrolls and through AP process. Just a quick breakdown of where we spend our money and a comparison for several years to see, how's that doing? You can see certificated costs, classified costs and benefits, which are really big ones, are all down. And that was part of our budgeting process, knowing that we were doing that. Supplies are also down. Services we talked about before is up dramatically. And then travel is about the same. It's pretty minuscule, actually. Just another way of looking at the same things. And this is, assets and liability. Where is our money? Local banks, Island County Treasurer, how many warrants outstanding, those type of things. It comes up with the same fund balance for each of those funds. Next. Our fund balance is a percent of the budget. It's the dotted line on the top. You can see that's starting to go down slightly, but it's still a very healthy fund balance in that, mid 23% range right now. Revenue breakdowns comparison to previous 4 years. You can see that our local property taxes are down slightly. We've talked about that being based upon the number of students we have. And as our student population becomes smaller, we can collect fewer local funds. The local revenue, things that are generated by the school and by the community center has popped back up. Our state and federal funds, again, are down. Those are related to student FTE. And then our federal funds, and that's predominantly a lot of that has to do with ESSER funds, is way down from a previous year.
Is the state special purpose funding going up there a result of last year's laws that went into effect to raise the special ed cap?
That's exactly what it is. The federal or the state special purpose funds is based on a couple of things. And one is special ed increased from 13.5% maximum to 15%. So that bumped it up. And also it's based on free and reduced numbers in the district. And that percentage went up slightly also, which generates more dollars for a district. The higher your free and reduced population, the more state special purpose funds you get. And this one is just looking at, our big cost centers. And the three on the left are salaries and benefits. And then you see supplies and services and travel on the other side of it. And again, services is that one that we have no control over, but that is dramatically increasing and is dramatically underfunded. And so if you want to talk to somebody in Olympia about something, this is one of those areas. Next. I think we're just about there. And our other funds, capital projects funds, we have about $2.7 million in there. Debt service has 88,000 with no big payment due until June. ASB about $113,000. The transportation vehicle fund still waiting on the electric school bus, but that'll reduce that down to about 280,000 once we get the bus and get it paid for. And then the private risk trust fund has about $808,000 in it. Any questions I could answer? Great.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next presentation, which is next report, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Moshe.
Thank you. So today we had, just before the board meeting, we had our first post-bond vote steering committee meeting. Had about 25 people in the room to help steer the work. This first meeting was all about where we are at the moment. So it was a lot of review of what got us to this point, And the next meeting occurs January 3rd. And we will be touring the facilities with the steering committee. The purpose of the steering committee is to make recommendations for the board to consider. The steering committee has a cross-section of folks on it, including students. Thank you, Carter, for coming today. And there are students, teachers, custodians, maintenance folks, board members. We have 2 board members on there, and the admin team. So a couple of community members, including members of the parks, since they just had a bond pass, so that we're in communication about that. Some experts, local experts. One person's an architect, one person's a landscape person. So a lot of good folks in the room. And part of the work is figuring out how to communicate with the community, and that's part of that steering committee's job. So more to come on that, but we're just getting underway. When we get back from break, I will be meeting on a Friday in early January with students at the middle school and high school, representatives from ASB, as well as the House of Reps group. So I'll start to not only get opinions about the bond work, but just in general. So that's coming up. We are on break. The district is closed come Friday. It's actually also a week of furlough for Mr. Pullman and I. So we will be on our furloughed week. And then inclusive, that's 1 week, and then the other is vacation time. So the district will be completely closed after Friday close of business and won't reopen until the 2nd of January. So folks are looking forward to that break. I know they are, because I participated in staff gatherings this afternoon, and people are really ready to take some time away from their work. So that was my update.
Thank you very much. And for the first time that I've been on the board, legislative representative update report. Director Jackson.
Thank you. Well, it's an exciting day to share a legislative update, because several of us, Director Williford, Dr. Moshe, our principals at the middle and high schools, our student representatives, and I got to spend our morning with 10th Legislative District Representative Clyde Shavers. He came to our middle and high school campus and spent several hours touring the buildings, speaking with our students, hearing firsthand about the issues that are most important to us and our needs as educators and as recipients of public education. As the vice chair of the House Education Committee, Representative Shavers seems to have a very good understanding of the issues and challenges facing educators and students. And I believe that he is an ally to us in our work to improve Washington State's performance in its constitutionally mandated paramount duty to make ample provision for education of all children. In terms of updates from the state, the news is not quite as heartening. Today, Governor Jay Inslee released a supplemental budget of $70.9 billion. My understanding in a cursory reading is that this is focused on addressing some pain points around behavioral health, opioid and fentanyl crises, housing and homelessness, and public education. And in terms of the public education funding shortfalls, my take on this supplemental budget is that it does try to address these staffing issues. It takes some small steps towards funding some teachers, some paraeducators, and some special education, but it falls dramatically short of meeting the real needs under these conditions of inflation and a fundamentally flawed prototypical model for school funding. So we're going to have to continue to be strong advocates for the state to fund the education that our students deserve. And I'm really grateful for the allies that we have both here in this room and in our associations such as WASDA, WASA, and our elected representatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other board members who'd like to make a report?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
One more quick
sorry.
note. Just that we also did hear back from the office of Senator Ron Mazzal, and he is unable to make an on-site visit prior to this upcoming session, but he would love to see us. I am using the word love. His aide expressed his willingness to meet with us when we are on the Hill in January, and also to try to schedule a site visit after the session.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other reports from board members?
Happy holidays to everybody and have a great winter break for those who get one. And thank you, Director Jackson, for organizing that visit from Representative Shavers. Glad he gets to see the amazing work that our educators are putting on and that our students are learning. I do want to address one item in the consent agenda. I read the consent agenda very thoroughly, and I trust that everyone else on the board does. It gets my vote because I approve of the items on it. And if there's a club that the high school is starting, I have the full faith in Mr. Patton, who signs those club forms, that the club is safe and in the best interests of our students, even when it deals with a topic that might be controversial. If you think about the context of a broader reckoning that a lot of educational spaces are going on with right now, in terms of the free speech versus the safety of others, I think it's really important that students have free speech and the ability to talk about topics that might make people uncomfortable, and that people's discomfort is not a reason to clamp down on speech. If the students are interested in a topic, they're going to talk about it either way. And how much better is it that they get to talk about it on campus with the oversight of trained educational professionals?
Any other comments, reports? All right. Thank you very much. I'll echo Director Greenhair and happy holidays. See you next year. This meeting is adjourned.